If you could travel back 40,000 years into the heart of European winter, you would find a world that looks entirely alien. A massive ice sheet blankets the north, and the landscape is a brutal, frozen tundra. But if you looked closely through the blinding snow, you might spot a thin curl of smoke rising from a cave mouth. Inside, a group of humans would be gathered around a hearth, sharing food, keeping warm, and speaking in a language we will never hear. But these weren't modern humans, they were Neanderthals. For nearly 400,000 years, Neanderthals were the undisputed masters of Europe and Western Asia. They survived multiple ice ages, hunted the largest megafauna on Earth, and adapted perfectly to some of the harshest environments our planet has ever seen. They had brains slightly larger than ours, thick, robust bones and muscles designed for immense power. They were not the dim-witted, club-dragging brutes that early 20th century science made them out to be. They made complex tools, buried their dead with care, created art, and looked after the sick and injured members of their clans. And then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. In the grand scale of evolutionary time, their disappearance happened in a heartbeat. For millennia, they thrived, and then, within just a few thousand years of modern humans arriving in Europe, they were gone. The disappearance of the Neanderthals is one of the greatest mysteries in human prehistory. For decades, scientists have argued over a single haunting question. Why did they go extinct? Was it a violent extermination at the hands of our ancestors? Did they succumb to a changing climate they couldn't adapt to? Or did something far more subtle and perhaps more tragic take place? To understand what actually happened to the Neanderthals, we first have to dismantle the myth of their inferiority. The old theory was simple. Modern humans were smarter and better, and when we arrived in Europe, we simply slaughtered our evolutionary cousins.
But the archaeological record tells a completely different story. Consider the discoveries at Shanidar Cave in Iraq. Archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal male known as Shanidar I, who lived to be around 40 years old. This individual had suffered a massive blow to the side of his face that left him blind in one eye. His right arm was withered and fractured in multiple places, likely amputated at the elbow during his life. He walked with a severe limp and had extensive hearing loss. Yet, despite being completely unable to hunt, gather, or defend himself against the apex predators of the Ice Age, he lived for years with these debilitating injuries. His community deliberately took care of him, brought him food, and protected him. This wasn't the behavior of unfeeling brutes. This was an empathetic, deeply social species that valued life beyond what an individual could physically contribute to the hunt. Furthermore, Neanderthals possessed advanced technology. They manufactured a specialized adhesive known as birch tar to fasten stone points to wooden spears. This process requires heating birch bark to exact temperatures in the absence of oxygen, a complex chemical process requiring significant planning, precise temperature control, and a deep understanding of fire. They also possessed the physical and genetic architecture for speech. The FOPT2 gene, critical for language in modern humans, has been found in Neanderthal DNA, and their hyoid bones were anatomically identical to ours. They spoke, they thought, they felt, and they cared. So if they weren't inferior, what went wrong? The first major clue lies in the Earth itself. Around 45,000 years ago, Europe's climate entered a period of extreme instability known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events. The climate didn't just get colder, it fluctuated wildly and unpredictably. Within the span of a single human lifetime, dense forests would transform into barren, windswept steppes and then shift back again a few decades later. This was an extraordinary problem for the Neanderthals because of their physical specialization. Neanderthals were built for the forest. Their short, stocky, heavily muscled frames were designed for ambush hunting. They didn't chase down prey over long distances. They hid in thick brush, waiting for a woolly rhino or a mammoth to get close, and then lunged forward with heavy, thrusting spears. It was a high-risk, brutal style of close-quarters combat that left almost every adult Neanderthal skeleton with a laundry list of healed bone fractures, remarkably similar to the injury patterns seen in modern rodeo riders. But as the climate fluctuated wildly, the forests began to recede permanently in many parts of Europe.
The landscape transformed into an open, flat, and completely barren environment called the Mammoth Steppe. In this open world, ambush hunting became nearly impossible. There were no trees to hide behind, no thick brush to cover an approach. Prey animals could see a predator coming from miles away. This change in the landscape exposed a massive physiological vulnerability in the Neanderthal body design, their energy requirements. Because of their immense muscle mass, an adult Neanderthal required an enormous amount of food just to survive. Estimates suggest they needed between 4,000 and 5,000 calories every single day, roughly the same energy intake as a modern Olympic athlete or an active polar explorer trekking across Antarctica. In a lush, predictable forest full of large mammals, this massive caloric demand was sustainable, but in a barren, rapidly shifting tundra where prey was scattered across hundreds of miles and constantly on the move, finding that many calories became an exhausting, near-impossible task. Their physical strength, which had been their greatest asset for hundreds of thousands of years, suddenly became an evolutionary liability. Enter Homo sapiens. Our ancestors evolved in the wide-open savannas of Africa. We were built entirely differently, optimized not for raw power, but for fuel efficiency.
We had long, lean limbs, lightweight skeletons, and an anatomy designed for endurance walking over vast distances. A modern human required significantly fewer calories per day to maintain their body than a Neanderthal. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they brought with them a completely different toolkit, specifically designed for open landscapes, projectile weapons. While Neanderthals had to get within arm's reach of a dangerous animal to kill it, Homo sapiens were using spear throwers and lightweight darts to hunt from a safe distance. As the environment shifted from forest to tundra, modern humans had the home court advantage. They could track prey across miles of open ground without expending all their energy, and they could kill it without risking life and limb in close-quarters combat. But climate and hunting styles alone aren't enough. There's a deeper problem that Neanderthals faced, clear in their genetic code: the problem of numbers. Genetic analysis reveals they were incredibly few. At their peak, the entire population of Neanderthals across Europe and Asia was likely less than 100,000 individuals. Some models place it as low as 10,000 active adults. Their entire population across an entire continent could have comfortably fit inside a single modern football stadium. Because they were spread thin, Neanderthals lived in isolated family bands of 10 to 20 people. They rarely interacted with other groups. When geneticists sequenced the DNA of a Neanderthal woman from Siberia, they found her parents were likely half-siblings or uncle and niece. This inbreeding was a direct consequence of extreme geographic isolation. They simply couldn't find anyone else to mate with. This low genetic diversity created a demographic trap. When a population is small and isolated, it becomes vulnerable to random shocks. If a brutal winter hits or a localized disease sweeps through a valley, an entire band could die out in weeks. If a band loses its few reproductive aged women, that lineage is permanently extinguished. There was no backup. Modern humans, by contrast, maintained vast social networks that acted as an evolutionary insurance policy. If a group of Homo sapiens faced a localized famine, they could rely on neighboring groups for support. Neanderthals didn't have that cushion. Then, around 40,000 years ago, a supervolcano near Naples erupted, triggering a catastrophic volcanic winter that shattered the remaining links between isolated Neanderthal pockets. As their numbers dwindled, modern humans continued to pour into Europe. And this brings us to the final twist. They didn't completely disappear. In 2010, scientists sequenced the Neanderthal genome and discovered that living people of non-African descent carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. When they encountered each other, they interbred. Because the modern human population was so vastly superior in numbers, the Neanderthal genetic pool didn't get wiped out by violence. It got diluted. They were simply swamped by the sheer volume of Homo sapiens. Their small numbers were slowly integrated, generation by generation, into the expanding human tide, until their physical characteristics vanished from the fossil record, leaving behind only the fragments of their code inside our cells. Today, those fragments are still active inside us, influencing our immune systems, helping us fight off modern pathogens, shaping our skin and hair characteristics, and even influencing our circadian rhythms and sleep patterns.
Their extinction wasn't a sudden execution, but a slow, quiet fade. When we look back at the empty caves of Europe, we shouldn't see a victory over an inferior rival. We should see a mirror,